Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the third lecture in the Life After Studio series this term. I'd like to welcome George Boyle, the founder of the Fumbally Exchange, to the Mackintosh School of Architecture. George is an award-winning designer and social entrepreneur. George is a graduate of UCD, or University College Dublin, and a member of the RIAI. She has practiced widely in the architecture profession in both the private and public sector. She was an associate director of Murray O'Leary, a groundbreaking international practice, and George now runs her own architectural practice, George Boyle Designs, from within the Fumbally Exchange. She founded the Fumbally Exchange in Dublin in 2010 as a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and creative professionals who share co-working spaces. Its success has seen the Fumbally Exchange grow despite continued economic difficulty in Ireland and led to the opening of more Fumbally Exchanges both within Ireland and abroad. So I hope you all enjoy the lecture. A warm welcome for George Boyle, please.
Hello everyone, it's a great privilege to be here. This is the work of one of my favourite architects, and I always wanted to come and check it out, and little did I think that the first time I'd be here would be for something as nerve-wracking as this. But anyway, I'm going to show you a presentation that's in 7 parts. The first thing that people said to me at home who have been here or studied here is that the seats are very hard and I was to keep it short. So I'm going to try and adhere to that, and I've also put the thing in 7 parts so that if you fall asleep you'll find it easier to pick up. At the end of each part there's a quote from an important, recognisable architect, so that if you find my own work abhorrent you can at least have some nice eye candy in there. But apart from this building and their buildings, all the work is work that I would have been somewhat involved with myself. I say somewhat, inviting criticism. Anyway, my name is George, as I said, and I now have no move it along facility. I'll try this.
Push the arrow.
Push the arrow.
Arrow.
Yeah, the arrows. Oh, they're working now. Very good, thank you. So I am, this is a description somebody came up with for me, so I kind of run with that. But really I'm an architect and a mom and somebody who kind of found being pushed out of architecture in the middle of a recession just not good enough. And I thought it was up to me to do something about it, so I did my best to do something about it, and founded the Fumbally Exchange, which I'll tell you a little bit about as we go along. These are some of the words that have been used to describe the Fumbally Exchange: urban knights, corporate pirates, campaign crusaders. The Wall Street Journal called us the scrappy little workhorse of Europe. The Irish Times thinks we're citizen developers, which I think is sweet. And my kind of preferred description is chaotic neutral, which anyone over 40 will remember as a kind of Dungeons and Dragons category, which was a board game back in the 70s. So Fumbally Exchange, we kind of think of ourselves as sort of reinventing how the architectural and other creative professions do business. So we're trying to kind of change the whole kind of culture in Ireland, from the kind of tough and ruthless culture that was prevalent during the Celtic Tiger days to the rough and toothless, which is kind of what we are now. So this is part 1. I'm going to do what I think is the thing I would like to have heard from where I stand now if I was finishing studio today. So I'm going to start by talking about a few things that kind of still bother me to this day about my own college experience. First of all, I suppose the case for empowerment is about trying to find a way to find your inner voice somehow, despite what you've been through in college. So being an architect who's now discovered a whole pile of other dimensions and who has crystallised activity across all sorts of disciplines in the social entrepreneur journey I've been on, I realised something really quite profound, and that is the training that we all get makes us so incredibly capable of doing absolutely anything out there. And I think that that's the first thing you should realise about the amazing thing architecture does. I know it's really hard to get a job as an architect now. I know that the times are tough all over the world, but what you've been taught in this context any school all over the world is giving you the raw material to do absolutely anything. That's the Leonardo thing. So also I'm kind of suggesting that, we now have no excuses, knowledge is power. And the first thing I discovered after I qualified and I got a really nice job after taking a little sabbatical for a few years on the busking and recording circuit. I thought it would all be easy, but I quickly discovered that, I left college thinking I knew an awful lot, and I quickly found out I knew absolutely nothing at all. And I'm kind of a bit grey in the hair and long in the tooth, and really in those days my only recourse was the public or very patchy office library. And I used to spend every night before a site meeting kind of immersed in books like The Meaning of Contract Law and how to run a building contract and what a payment certificate means, just before I went on site and told everybody about how it was all going to go, as if I was kind of, the guru of all knowledge. But I found that it worked quite well for me, and now we have no excuses, because obviously all that information is out there. It's all there for you to engage with, it's all there for you to talk about, so there's no excuses. This is another thing I want to address, because recently I was part of a cultural global art project, and I sat at a table talking about how we were all going to collectively combat the recession with 2 recent graduate architects, and they didn't think much of me at all. And when I eventually got to the nub of it, they didn't think much of me at all, because they thought that people who had practice in Dublin and were surviving were after selling out, so I couldn't really be much good as an architect. Now, that remains to be seen, I suppose, in the whole kind of, context of time, but we are taught a little bit to kind of make the ideals and aspirations of aesthetic something really sacred. And I think it's really important that we recognise that what we do in that process is we alienate each other from growth, from incredible potential, and from meeting incredible heights out there in the real working world. So this is just a kind of a reminder that, yes, there's something wonderful about having an artistic training and getting an aesthetic training, and I couldn't emphasise that enough. But we are, in the end, servants, and that is our core responsibility. Being an aesthetic person is something that you should consider a persuasion bonus as part of your work, rather than the core value of your work. And I mean, I think the most important thing that you need to learn in that is that persuasion itself is a skill that we all need to learn. Oh, and by the way, by the time you're my age, you'll feel like servant of darkness rather than anything else. Hold on a second. So that kind of goes with this slide, which is go away with your notions. Notions is a very Irish word. We've called notions what happened to Ireland during the Celtic Tiger years, when we all got into lattes and patio heaters and all sorts of crazy things like that. But there's all these things that architects kind of embrace because they're common themes, and I'd be kind of appealing to you to find whatever it is that makes you tick, and not really get into the polo neck jumper necessarily or the goatee beard necessarily. Go for whatever makes you happy. Obviously we are considered all sorts of things by all sorts of people, but I think again it's very important that we remember that how we present ourselves to people who aren't architects is a critical way for them to view us. And there's been an awful lot of changes in the building regulation kind of field that have made us very technologically responsible, and this can really bleed and drain the really cool things about what an architect is. So I think if we can remember that we're comrades rather than competitors, everything will be a little bit easier. This is the last thing, I think, almost in my part 1. Don't tell us what we can't do. My recollection of college, and this is an UCD, so I'm not suggesting it's universal, is that there was this guy here telling us how great the guy who made the thing was there, and how we weren't great at all, and how we would never be that great. And, he was there to teach us to try to be that great, but, it was a losing game. And I remember taking that quite personally once or twice. I'm sure it was possibly my own kind of youthful sensitivity, or maybe that's just the way I'm made. But I mean, we can do whatever we want to do. We're all made of stardust, and really the thing I learned since I became a sole trader is that in a culture where 90% unemployment is a quoted figure for architects, and I'm kind of starting 3 businesses at once with 2 kids, 4 mortgages, and absolute desperation, you can create your own future if you just kind of look around, which goes into the unlimited potential thing. I don't think I need to labour that point. So end of phase 1 is John Toomey of O'Donnell and Toomey, who's an award-winning architect from Dublin and who designed the London School of Economics, which just opened recently. He said to me in 4th year, after I kind of mullocked along through 3 years going, is this really for me? If I fail it, I'll leave. If I do great in it, I'll leave, because one will show me it's not for me, and the other will show me, sure, I kicked that ass now and I can move on to something else. He said to me that architecture is the real potatoes and I should stick with it. And I think he's kind of responsible for changing my mind about something. So part 2 is, okay, so you've left school and off you go into the real world. And I think that the entire education system up to now, and I hope that's all going to change radically in the next 10 years, has been to go get a job. So I did. After the couple of years on the busking circuit, I got a job with Murray O'Leary Architect. This was the first building I designed, and this building used to be the 3 buildings here at the front and the building at the back, and the kind of connecting building here, which was 2 stories, and everything else was just wasteland and car park. And my client gave me a brief which said, we are a school that has been around for nearly 300 years. James Joyce came here. We are very, very important, and we want a rugby pitch and a running track and a sports hall and an assembly hall and a drama hall and an arts faculty and a science faculty and all these things, and a canteen, all sorts of things, and a car park, and they had a car park. So being, I suppose, young and foolish, I didn't go, well, you know, that sounds impossible. I said, okay. And I'll never forget it, because it was the best journey of my young life, and that's the one where I was reading up every day about what do I need to tell the contractor, and really should I be carrying bags of cement down the stairs on the day before the building opens myself. Putting the football pitch on the roof or running track on the roof didn't sort of faze me at all. It was just a question of having all these pieces of a puzzle and putting them all together in a particular way. And I think that's the point of that is, you know, nothing is impossible, and in fact the more constraints you get, sometimes the more magic the outcome. Authenticity. This is an important point here about, you know, what things are made of. This building is for 1,000 students in the heart of Victorian Dublin, where everything is made out of red brick. And we kind of reinvented the idiom a little bit with a kind of a piano nobile underneath and a kind of red brick top couple of stories and a bit of zinc there at the top. And we went to tender with that lovely aspiration for that to be purely made out of handcrafted materials and wet trade. And the incoming contractor threw all of that out the window, including the architect, and said he wanted to make it all out of innovative panels. And we had a real problem with that when he eventually realised he couldn't live without us and asked us to come back in with his tail between the legs. We had a real problem with it because obviously there's that question of authenticity. And at one stage, you know, my boss was saying, you know, we can't do this because brick slips applied to a panel are just not real. They're not architecture. And I suppose I kind of started to argue the toss a little bit that, you know, stone has been applied in stone slips for the past, you know, 60 or 70 years and nobody has a problem with it. You know, it's still real brick. So the question is, does it perform? So we had mock-up after mock-up after mock-up built. We put it through test after test after test. We had a BBA test done on it. We got it certified. We had an Irish Agremont cert done on it. And we were really trying to make it fail, but in the end it passed. And I said, we can't actually say this isn't an authentic product because it's a new product. It has passed every test. And now the tests are sufficient, really, for us to trust the product. We had a lot of kind of questions about how it would perform at opes and junctions and joints, but in fact, it's performing very well. But the one thing I needed to do as an architect was to tell the kind of people like you that we know what we're doing here. And so we hide little things all around the building, like we use stack bonded brick in all of the reveals of the windows. This is impossible to do with real brickwork. we used a similar idiom underneath where the soffit turns back. We used long panels of brick. So it's showing the world that we know this is not actually brick. This is a new way of looking at materials. And I think an awful lot of architecture critics have since visited it and found that they found that little kind of feature for themselves and found it quite delightful. And that's a kind of a variation on integrity. I'm not so good on integrity, I have to say. What I believe integrity is just finding your voice, and that's where the whole chaotic neutral thing comes into play. You are who you are. You're not good, you're not bad, you're not lawful, you're not evil, you're not necessarily chaotic, but you're all of those things in some degree, and you need to just make sure that you find out what part of that is yours. As you see, I haven't used all my own work in a lot of the images that are in this presentation, but I kind of feel that, as Picasso said, real artists steal, and, or was it me who said that? Anyway, it was something that I kind of learned over time, that integrity is not about being true to a style, it's not about being true to what public people believe you should do, it's about being true to yourself. Then just a little note to say that even if you do get a job, which I'm not professing to be the perfect solution when you leave school, but even if you do get a job, you can have some amazing highlights. And this picture was taken on the day that 1,000 student bed space scheme was opened, and it was opened 3 months early on account of the Special Olympics coming to Dublin, and they had nowhere to stay. And I remember the day that they decided they were going to take the facility. I got on the phone to every supplier who was on site and every consultant, and the engineer had been scuba diving off the coast of West Cork, and he didn't even get out of his wetsuit. He got into the car and drove up, and everybody, the CEO of the stairs company was on his hands and knees putting carpet on the stairs, and it was just the most lovely thing to see. And when the kids came after 3 weeks of frenetic activity to kind of inhabit that place, they had been staying in Butlins, which is a kind of almost refugee camp out in North Meath, where they were like kind of 40 people to one shower, and here they each had their own shower, and it was like some of them had special needs. I remember my husband and I, between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. in the morning, went around snagging all the rooms just before somebody came in behind us. And as I was leaving one of the rooms, one of the girls came out after me and just gave me a big hug. That was kind of like a career highlight for me. And then this was my dream project, where that's a very bad image. That's probably because it's copyright. But anyway, the Office of Public Works came to my boss and said there was a problem with the precinct around where the National Parliament was. And meanwhile, there was a kind of a real pressure for the Parliament to move somewhere midlands. You're not from Ireland, so you won't remember the really nutty and zany and crazy idea that the answer to growing rural communities was to decentralise government and to move major departments to spots all around the country. So they were trying to do this with the National Parliament, and they asked us to do a kind of a study on it to see where it should go. And I got the job in-house, and I instead said that, where it was surrounded by all sorts of amazing cultural institutions. This is Leinster House. This is where the top house, the Senate, sits. This is where the Dáil Chamber is, which is the lower house. But this is the National Museum of Ireland. This is the National Library of Ireland. This is the National Gallery of Ireland. This is the Natural History Museum of Ireland. And this is government buildings, which was formerly the Science and Technology wing of UCD. I mean, this is just gorgeous. So instead, we kind of discovered that there was at least 3 stories of unstable ground under part of the site. And instead of having to kind of look at filling that in, we put a multi-layered proposal and a 25-year development control plan in place for it. And to this day, I think, in the absence of anything else, they're still working to our plan, which is a great career moment as well. End of part 2. This is Louis Barragon, another favourite architect of mine, and that's about how beauty is the oracle that speaks to us all. Part 3, do I look bothered? This part is all about you know, when you come out of college and you think how architecture looks and the rules and regulations and the technical guidance documents are all you ever need to know, and they're the bits that really, really matter. Whereas in fact, you should really be looking somewhere else. I mean, here's that lovely word, sustainability, and I say, yada, 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 yada. Everybody's been talking about sustainability for so long. Sustainability is in our blood now, I hope, and I hope it's in the way you think and the way you work and the way you walk and cycle and the way you deal with everything. It's absolutely important that we embrace it, but I don't think it should be a kind of a major agenda item anymore. It should be inherent in what we think and do. This is a sustainable village that we built around a former pool that used to supply the water to Guinness. It's on the canal. The canal is dead because there's no way of boats going from the last docking point of the boat into the city because there's nowhere for them to dock in the meantime and refuel. So the idea was to activate that pool and to build around it a sustainable village using a whole new kind of idiom of how communities work together or live together. So it's the idea of having elevated courtyards in the middle, having two-storey houses on the ground floor, and having apartments above, but having common streets that are ventilated and punctured holes that will naturally bring air and light into them, and then having these kind of shards of towers on the edges. This wasn't built, surprisingly enough. And then the idea of innovation. Innovation is the buzzword in all universities at the moment. Everybody's talking about entrepreneurship and innovation, and I'm a bit like innovation blah, because I think innovation is about taking what's there and doing it a different way and saying, okay, well, you know, maybe we can reinvent this and maybe we can remodel that and recycle the other. I think, again, that's something that we should all now be doing, and we should be looking a little deeper, and we should be getting a little bit more immersed in more original ideas. And design. Duh. So design is... This is so some of the debates that I've had in Fumbally Exchange have been very enlightening. I always thought I was a designer, and when I sat with an advertising executive who was the creative controller of Saatchi & Saatchi and one of the best graphic designers in the country, at a kind of lunch session, we were talking about design, and I said, you know, I really love being a designer, and Jack said to me, you're not a designer. And Graham said, no, you're not a designer, I'm a designer. And I said, well, what's the big difference? And Jack said, you think things up. Designers take things that are thought up and make them look lovely and make them work. And I didn't think of it like that. And I think it's a really good thing to know the difference between being a creator, which architects are, and a designer, which is what architects are sometimes branded as. The value of creation is phenomenal. It's absolutely enormous. From monetary points of view, from society's point of view, and from the kind of cultural ripple effect and momentum that goes with anything new and fresh and appropriate to the way we live. So that's what I'm trying to get at there. But having said that, the other part of our job is that we are absolutely smothered by incredibly deep legislation, and to bend rules within this profession, I'll just say this, you have to know the rules really, really, really well. So go to the technical guidance documents, obey them like a slave, but if you get to the point where you really understand them so well and you know what the law is saying, then feel free to design the way you want to design, because you'll be able to justify it. And that's the staircase in Carton, where somebody I was working with said, you know, there's a bit of a problem with the levels when we're trying to kind of tie into the existing house. So what I've done is I've got a 185 riser all the way down to the second floor, and then I have a 175 riser, and then I have a 160 riser. And you know, like he said he was perfectly happy as a recent graduate to stand over that. And I just thought, this is exactly what you don't do. You know, you don't make decisions like that when you know that, or well, he didn't know that, but 90% of claims against architects are to do with trips and falls, and something like 60% of those are to do with riser heights and stairs not being the same. So, you know, these are the kind of things that you need to learn. And then always be aware about strategy. Strategy is a much bigger thing, and this is about your client. This is something that you can bring to your client that other people in the architectural profession might not do. Okay, so this is a diagram I did for a repository in North Wales, and it was all about how the different elements relate to each other. The client hadn't yet done this exercise, and he was absolutely over the moon because he'd been spending months and months and months dealing with the different department heads and the different users and trying to map this out. But for us, this kind of stuff is quite obvious and it's quite easy to do because we think visually and we know how to assemble these things once we get the brief. But if we realise that we can write the brief, again, we're providing extended value to our clients. And then there's that word vision. The strategy and vision really go hand in hand. At the moment, I'm working with Trinity College. This is a model of a submission made by O'Donnell and Toomey for a new business school, and I'm architecturally advising the Provost and Fellows and Scholars of Trinity College Dublin on the new business school and a number of other schools that are developing, because they feel that they need somebody who has an overview of the whole campus and who has an understanding of what the lifeblood of the campus is and what the important parts of the college's different strategies for innovation or for creativity and how they tie in together and how the built environment reflects that. And this is a project I'm working on at the moment. It's in Inchicore village, which is a tiny little neighbourhood just on the west of Dublin, and it's kind of the perfect bookmark for Dublin. It's a gateway, and at the moment it's very, very down on its luck. And Fumbally Exchange did a job in the centre of town that was also in a very, very downtrodden area that's now become one of the hippest places in town, and everyone wants to work there and everyone wants to live there. And we kind of managed to achieve that using a number of very deliberate events and exhibitions and other kind of self-conscious, contrived stuff that eventually brought people in and made them kind of really engage with the area. And this is what we're doing now for Inchicore. So you have insight. Again, like, you know, when I assembled the team for this project out of Fumbally Exchange, Fumbliers, I didn't use an urban designer. I used a landscape architect. Yes, that's quite traditional. But I used an interior designer. He did this drawing. So he's a guy who looks at the inside of buildings, and I wanted him to look at the urban environment and give me his insight because he's quite used to the area and he would look at it very fresh. And that kind of insight can come from the deepest part of you. And then there's the issue of respect. And I mean, I know what I've said earlier about sustainability and, you know, those kind of things, but I'm an accredited conservation architect, and looking at our heritage is extremely important. And it just pains me to see so many people either sterilise and utterly freeze frame old buildings and make them useless kind of icons that nobody really can access, when you can really bring them into real life and make them usable and make them sing again. And the same with landscape. You know, this is Dartry, the same project with the students in it. The college had transferred over 1,000 trees over 200 years to this site. And when we went for planning, there was nearly 200 objections. And most of those were because they felt that all those trees would be lost. Most of them didn't even know the value of those trees, but some of them are like endangered species. One of them, there's only 3 of them left in Europe. And we were able to keep all those trees. We moved 5. It was really very interesting because the secretary of the contractor was sitting up here one day and she saw a tree going by the window. She had a very hard time accepting that. Empathy. This is another thing that I can't say enough about because there's 2 sides to it. You know, I mean, the world doesn't empathise with architects. Well, that's possibly because we kind of make ourselves a bit aloof to the world. But this is a lovely piece of graffiti, and it's a claim for architects to have the rights and liberties that painters, poets, and artists, I suppose, have held for so long. And while I know I've been talking about us being servants and all those kind of ideas, we are also artists, and we need to be able to claim that for ourselves. And again, that's back to, don't be hard on your partner or your colleague or your peer who expresses themselves in a way that's different, because artists are allowed to do that, so why not architects? And empathy is also about learning about scale, learning about your user. You know, your client is only a middle person quite often. They're the person paying for the project. They're the person doing the detailed schedules. But the people who really will be the measure of its success are the people who use it. So this is a creche we designed, and this is one of the early designs of it. And it's all about kind of making it really, really beautiful for the kids. And this is a project in New York that we're working on at the moment. And we did a design for them. They gave me a budget of 10 million. It's a GAA clubhouse. And we came up with a lovely design, and we were just about to go for planning when our client said, do you know what, if we open a 10 million building for the GAA in New York, we're going to have to make that work as a business model. So we're going to have to get the local basketball team in, we're going to have to get the local baseball team in, we're going to have to rent it out to these people, and it's not going to be a GAA clubhouse anymore. So they said, would you mind terribly if we went at it again? And they said, can you make us the simplest possible building? So I said I would, and I went over to New York, and I went out with a whole pile of them, and we all had a great time. And as I was doing that, I met a guy who supplies stone, and he said, do you know what, he would love to see his stone used on this building. And I met a guy who provides metal panels, and he said he would love to supply metal panels to the building. So between those, I kind of came up with an idea of like how the Irish simplest form of shelter, the barn, works. You know, it's a kind of corrugated metal roof and sometimes a stone plinth. And we kind of just used that idiom to try and work it up a bit. That's about a quarter the size of the original. It's changing rooms on the ground floor, a bar, and an open facility that's just a shelter on the upper floor. And it should be fairly resistant to the snow factor and all those kind of loads that will come on account of the climate and different rules there. So simplicity is another one of those aspirations. Perfect Pitch. This is Modular Man by Corbusier, and I spent a lot of time when I was in my final years obsessing about the golden section and finding out that there was an awful lot of proportional parallels between the modular man and the properties of the very organic driven mathematical model. Golden section, don't get me started on it. But what I'm getting at here is that in music I'm also kind of a cellist, and one of the things that's really important to learn when you're a musician is how to pitch yourself and how to just know where you put your finger for a note. And you need to do that with scale. You need to be able to say, you know, this is a foot, or, you know, this is a metre, whatever. You need to be able to kind of feel that in your bones so that you're not always reaching for how many square metres is this. I better kind of, you know, get out a plan and measure it. You know, I mean, those kind of things are really, really hard to learn, but they're very, very valuable. And then alignment. Alignment is about getting the right skill at the right time. So this project is the Cork School of Music, and when we were doing the project in the office, I wasn't on the team. And as a musician, they called me in for crit, and I realised that, you know, they had made little kind of performance rooms all over the place. They had all sorts of kind of crazy things, but most importantly, they had a kind of Sydney Opera House style auditorium in the middle, and it was really, really overblown. And I was kind of down with all the little rooms for rehearsal, but it was also really important to have lots of little rooms for performance. I mean, this scale room is what a school needs, not an auditorium. If they get so good that they need a big auditorium, they can go to the local cathedral or they can go to the local theatre. But they need performance spaces that would suit all genres and that will encourage and counter and maximise the possibility for new genres to develop and new things to inspire people. So that's what that's about. And then instruments of intimacy. I'm not great on CAD, so these are just two examples of drawings I had to do under pressure, and I did them on PowerPoint. And it just shows you that, you know, if you have, I mean, it's not really great drawing, but if you have a little spot of pressure and you don't have the right package to cover it, or you don't have the right pencil, you can always make whatever you do have work. Humour, this was one of my favourite parts of the Leinster House project. In the first phase of development, they asked us to overhaul the national bar and the visitors' bar. So this is the members' bar. So this is where the TDs all drink at night. And what we did with an artist was we did a rubbing from the foundation stone of Leinster House, which is a Latin inscription which says, "O ye who look on this piece of writing, if you see it, it is to show you that all great things are fallible and vulnerable and fall, and let you think about that when you're thinking about how powerful you are as a man." And we kind of put it up on the wall in Latin with a little inscription on it. But I thought it was a really good piece of kind of, you know, humour for a place where politicians are renowned for acting a small bit out of order. And then this is a project that's causing a bit of controversy on Twitter at the moment. So this is a distillery that we just got planning for last week. It's in an old industrial part of town in Dublin. and it basically it draws a lot on idioms of the time, but it's also meant to be a market-driven piece of architecture. It's not so well represented there, I think, because it's got the usual sort of I think the projector's laughing at it. But anyway, that is something that I think you also have to be able to do, is that if your client is making you feel a little bit like that you have to take certain parts of his traditionalist agenda, you can bow out and say, actually, it's more than my job's worth, or that goes against my principles. Or you can find a way to integrate some of the features of it, and actually draw in a little bit of comment and a little bit of humour into it. Kitsch, this is the next big thing, so I'm just including a slide about that. And then just, it's always also a great idea to work with other disciplines like artists, and this is something we did for a very interesting mixed-use development near the Boyle Valley, where the prehistoric tombs are, and we designed these temporary art installations which were based on ogham writing. And that's just a little bit from Tadao Ando. So part 4, get a life, not a job. This is about what happens when things change. So I thought I was going to stay in Murray O'Leary forever. I was there for 15 years. And then one day I woke up and I was called in, and the practice had gone into liquidation. I had to start my own practice. It was very clear I wasn't going to leave the country. I had 2 small children, and my parents. I had to look after those, so I decided to start my own practice, but it quickly became apparent that it was very, very difficult to do that, and there wasn't much support, and that it was very lonely working at home, and it was putting me back in a pool of other extension designers and people who were kind of just doing the small stuff, and I had been doing quite a lot of big stuff, and I didn't really want to leave that behind. And I rang Ken Shuttleworth from Make, who I think has been speaking here, and asked him about his model, and he was very helpful, but I still felt, again, it's a commercial organisation, it's a way of getting architects to own their future, but I wanted to do something different. So I started a co-working space, and it was not for profit, so basically the entire movement is volunteer-led. And what Fumbally Exchange is, it's a co-working space that is dedicated to 4 points, 2 of which are about the people who come in, and 2 of which are about the environment in which it's in. And it works on the basis that innovation is the art of finding opportunity where none is thought to exist. So it's about trying to really make people see things that other people can't see. And it was the idea of getting people out of home, or out of kind of a redundant position, or out of an old office situation into a collective space and putting them into a new entity. Also, it was kind of based on the fact that most people, in their interactions with others, are somewhere in the kind of zone in the centre. Like, you start off indifferent to other people, and as you get to know them, you kind of make quick, rapid judgments. What colour is their hair? What kind of shoes are they wearing? What kind of profession do they have? But as you go along, then you get to a point of tolerance. Not many people go much further than that. But with Fumbally Exchange, we're all about trying to add the value of what deeper knowledge of your fellow colleague and co-worker is, until you get to a point of full appreciation of their value and what they add. And that can actually lead to commercial opportunity as well. And we thought it would start off being a kind of incubator that would get people to a point of security and then let them fly away. But in fact, it's actually become something much more than that. And what it did was this is a building that's my car there on the left, the little one with the L plate. It was refurbishing what was a CPO derelict old brewery building and putting it into offices and apartments, and putting a major new development, 100,000 square feet up next door. That's where my old architect's office was, and when they went into liquidation, the landlord allowed us access to the ground floor. He was down to 10% occupancy. He couldn't let that place for less. He couldn't let it for €10 a square foot. And in the end, when we left there last year, it was 97% occupancy and fetching €38 a square foot. So I think that's a kind of a great measure of our success. So this is just a few pictures from the area, from the room that we worked in, and some of the rooms that what we would do is we would put exhibitions and events on in adjacent vacant premises, and that's how other organisations would come in and look at them and go, God, I'd like to work here alongside you guys. And that's how we brokered a lot of the tenancies running forward. might recognise somebody in that photograph. So these are our 4 mandate points. The first one is urban regeneration. So this is a kind of a study that we did. We had to do it when we were shortlisted for a Social Entrepreneurs Award. We had to do this study of how much direct influence the Fumbally Exchange had over the transformation of vacant into occupied premises was. So in this one, the orange areas are vacant in 2010, and in the subsequent one, they're green in 2012. And these are some of our neighbours that came in on the back of meeting us, and we brokered the tenancies with our client, our landlord, I mean. Then the second point is about community consolidation. It's about bringing together communities where everyone was feeling really defensive and they had their arms crossed, and that they weren't sharing any of their remaining kind of little meagre wealth with the rest of the world. And by running events and by getting this cafe up and running, we were able to kind of really bring the community together, and the events there led to all sorts of interactions between markets and cafes, between PR agencies and event companies and various other things. And it really has made the area have its own character. And these are just a few more images about that. In innovation and enterprise, this is about what happens within the room. So it's about how we tapped into the other revolution that was going on at the same time as the architectural crash. The innovation revolution was happening in communications and lightweight mobile working. So these are lots of tools that make the mobile workplace just a no-brainer, and co-working is sweeping the world. It's just a phenomenon, and it's really, really welcome, but I think we're the only ones who are adding on that value of working in the community and the urban environment. Creative collaboration. So with this, we're trying to work with universities. So we do an annual design dialogue with the University of Ulster. We do an annual design dialogue with the National College of Art and Design. We're working with UCD TCD Innovation Academy, and we just run speaking events in that regard. We also do collaborations between ourselves, and if the collaborations have a social impact, we run them as Fexpertise projects. And then I suppose what happened was we got to 97% occupancy. The place was really popular, and somebody made an application for the room we were in. So our landlord said to us, "It's been great, guys, thanks very much, but you don't have any protection on your tenancy, so it's time for you to move on." And we found that a little bit hard to take. But having said that, it was the best thing that ever happened to us. It was a sad day when we left Fumbally Square, but we found this kind of piece of old rubbish and transformed it over the course of 2 months. So basically we went out for tender last June, and we got tenders back from 3 companies, and they were all in excess of €350,000. And they all said that the build would take about 18 months, and that was June, and we opened on August the 1st, having spent 38,000. So one of the really key messages of the Fumbally Exchange is money is not necessarily currency. Currency is all sorts of exchanges of value. There's a barter economy that is very, very healthy. There's a black economy that's very, very healthy. But mostly there's a goodwill economy, which is very, very healthy and perfectly legal. And that's really what we borrowed immensely on, is people who were within Fumbally Exchange offering skills that they had, people who had benefited from people within Fumbally Exchange referring them or appointing them or nominating them. And through that we were able to achieve what really was another impossible. This is a 5-storey building in the middle of Dublin city, and we now have 70 businesses working there. So that was what it was like, and that was what it was like before we moved everyone in. And this is what it's like today. So, Peter Sumter. I promise I didn't steal this from your Facebook page, David. So part 5 is about the spaces between the notes, and this is a little bit about the things that make Fumbally tick. So again, I talked about exhibitions, seminars, events, workshops, Fexacucha, art, performance, photography, fashion. All these things have helped to bring the whole area up and to make it really sing again. These are just a couple of snapshots. And now that we're in Dame Lane, which is the new building, we have this amazing ground floor space, and we're running this pop-up shop every three months. So up to Christmas we had Makers and Brothers and Others, who are an achingly cool hipster craft curator organisation, and now we have Ness Drinks for the detox of January, February, providing us with juices that are slow pressed and delicious. And again, we run other programs, such as we run apprenticeships, which are different to internships because we don't see a free labour value in apprenticeships. We see a very, very level, even mutual benefit 3-month period where people can come in, we can work with them on their agenda of what they need to learn, and they can work with us in helping us build our business forward. And this is what we call the Fex Factor. We don't allow advertising. So we don't believe in marketing or advertising or PR. We want it to be proper branding where people come to us because they know we're great. Expanding the concept is something that Aveen referred to earlier. We're now looking at a music one, a craft one, a children's one, a media one, a social enterprise one. We have one open in Balbriggan and Waterford. We're looking at opening ones in Cork, Galway, Limerick, Derry, London, and we have one open in Ravenna in Italy. This is just an example of the kind of projects that we do together. This was the outcome of 2 architects working with me as the kind of brief development curator, and in both cases a graphic designer was on the team and a 3D modeller was on the team, both taking the same space to make a new whiskey bar. I think they're amazing. And then the other thing we're opening is the Fex Academy. This is the idea of having a place that provides spot-on learning, exactly tailored to your needs for people who are too cool for school. Like, they can't part with weeks or months of their lives and loads of money because they just don't have time for that. So if they just need a bit of this training or a bit of that training for a particular purpose, we run little short modules based on a kind of a funded Kickstarter model. So if people subscribe to a course and it hits the green button, it goes. And the primary school rules, these are the things that we work to. So the primary school rules are based on primary school rules and they are really quite effective because they are pretty much what they say on the tin. We also use the pirate code because we found that that's quite helpful. So that's our code of conduct. And these are our core values. And I think I'll leave it at what Mies van der Rohe said there, that God is in the detail. I do have a lot more, but I think I ran out of time. Tell me if you want me to go on. Yeah, I thought so.
You're moving pretty quickly. So
Are you sure? Will I go to learning to fly? Okay. Right. So in 2011, I got an award for this work from the Arthur Guinness International Fund. Me and some other blokes over there. And I learned what the word entrepreneur meant. And then in 2012, I got this other award from Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. And really what I discovered was that I knew nothing about business, but that knowing about business is not a dirty word. Entrepreneur is not a dirty word, but knowing about business is fantastic. I've had a lot of mentorship and I've had a lot of training, and I realised then how much we are equipped to do great things in the business circle, because it is so easy when you've been trained the way we've been trained. We just don't know how to do it. We don't really know how to run a business. So starting with the 5 stages of recession, we kind of believe at the end there we're in the acceptance phase, and an awful lot of people are still sort of back here kind of complaining about the rain. But this is all about, you know, what it's like to be an entrepreneur and how you get started. So I'm kind of saying that, you know, you have the option of getting a job, but this is really about what to do if you want to do it yourself. So the first thing is you get an impulse, you know what you want to do. You want to open an architecture practice, or you want to open some kind of practice that combines your hobby of photography or web building or illustration with a little bit of architecture. It is actual lunacy, but there's something really great about being in a lunatic state. It's very exhilarating, and you should trust those voices inside your head because they will lead you to a magical place. And the ideas come together very well, and then you kind of make a plan. But making a plan is not for girls. I don't mean that in a gender way. I mean it in the kind of, you know, it's hard way. But it's not an idea until you make it happen, and that's where things kind of get a little bit thorny. But you get this incredible euphoria, you get this sense of freedom, you feel like you're flying, you throw yourself off the edge. Because the ground is glistening with coins, isn't it? But this is really what happens. You find yourself very quickly falling, maybe with style, maybe not. First thing that happens after that is you feel just terribly guilty. What have I done? I was a fool. I really don't know what I'm doing. This is just absolutely ridiculous. You see all the competition and, oh my God, everyone is doing something similar. How are we going to get anything when they're all so good at it? You've kind of tried to make yourself unique, but sometimes that means you're not really any kind of practical use anymore. And then finally, you had forgotten about cash flow. And when you run out of money, the results are a bit messy. So you get kind of caught in this kind of trap. This is like the day before your crit. And that's where you find that you're completely lost. And as Lewis Carroll so succinctly said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And this is what you kind of find yourself doing. I mean, I think this cycle happens in architecture school all the time. You know, you kind of think you're doing great, then suddenly you find a problem, and then it's all gone snafu, you know, situation normal, all fucked up. And you kind of start questioning who you are and your identity. But the thing that happens then is that you lose your passion. And if you lose your passion, yeah, you may as well just quit. But the passion is actually something that you can rekindle by going out, getting a bit of fresh air, and getting re-engaged with the world, because passion is the only thing that will differentiate you from everybody else. And this is the key discovery that I made on my personal journey, and certainly I know that I see it happening with my colleagues every day in the 70-strong business that we work in. Once you accept that you are responsible for your own destiny, you start taking care of the things you don't like doing but have to be done. And they become sort of second nature to you. They're like breathing. They're really quite easy. They're just a pain. It's like kind of cleaning the toilet. You have to do your VAT returns. But when they're done, you know. And then the other thing is that we all focus on the centerpiece, which is the performance. I'm sure you're all guilty of this. We're all busy in the business of making architecture, but you're forgetting to do enough research, and you're forgetting to record it later. And if you don't do the two pieces at either end, you lose at least 65% of the value of what you have in the middle. But I think, you know, you have to learn how to forgive yourself, because in hell no one can hear you dream. And that is when maybe you discover, if you forgive yourself, that if you love what you do and you do what you love, enough is enough. You don't have to be, you know, the next Lord Foster. You don't have to be the next Stephen Hall. Sometimes you can just be you on your own. Sometimes you can be you in a partnership. Sometimes you can be a little business or a nano business, as we've discovered. Any business lower than 5 people is called. And that work is its own reward. And always look on the bright side of life. And then you'll be rolling like a river. But if you find that it's not working out, you should always know when to quit. So there we go. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to thank George for that inspiring talk. It's definitely a different perspective on the life after the studio, and I think it kind of showed us that there are different options for us once we qualify. I'd like to open the floor to any questions now, if anyone has any questions.
It seems all like a little bit like magic, which is what is inspiring and fantastic, but everybody's sort of wondering, like, what is the first step? You know,
Yeah.
You've got the computer and the 20 euros
Yeah.
and the 20,000 pounds of debt. You know, how do you pay the heating bill and the rent and the food?
Yeah.
For that first little bit until you get started? I think that's really the question.
Yeah. And the answer to that is you create work. I mean, the motto of Fumbally Exchange is making work together. And the reason we call it making work together is because we're making work together, but because we're making work. We're actually finding opportunities for work. So that first week, I brought my 6-week-old baby into the office every day. I rang everybody on my client list. There was no work. I went around then door to door to the stakeholders in the area, landowners, who had found that because of the recession, their, 70, 170, 200 million euro projects that had planning and archaeological digs completed and all sorts of things done, they were now completely and utterly redundant. There was no way that those projects could ever happen. Meanwhile, they were sitting on land that was losing value daily, vacant buildings that were losing integrity, and dereliction sets in so fast. And we found that, at very low level, we were able to kind of get them to invest in ideas. So from those ideas, now in that area in the Liberties, there's nearly 680 million's worth of projects. I wouldn't claim credit for any of those directly, apart from the 3 that I'm working on, which would be together probably around 21 million. But the others are definitely a result of the area getting a sense of identity back, getting a sense of pride back, getting a sense of purpose and a kind of a quirky charm of its own. And people really identify with the Fumbally area now. It was before it was just an unknown little lane. So
my question would be just sort of as a kind of more of a statement than it, but that there's an incredible potential at the margins is what you seem to be suggesting. So
yeah.
Those abandoned, derelict, or mute, or whatever, are instead of being seen as emptiness, there are opportunities to slip something in, maybe even temporarily, that allows sort of some thing to happen. And just the making of things happening, as small as they are, can generate bigger things.
Exactly, and I mean the one of the projects that I did kindle from the very start was a project called the Heart of the Liberties project, and I went into the local authority and I said to them I didn't want any money from them. I just wanted them to hear me out in terms of a vision for that part of town and let me use their logo as a sign of their support. And they said absolutely, and they were all out of ideas themselves. As a result of that, I got the local builders, local landowners together. I was lucky, I suppose, in that part of town where it's an industrial area. Large swathes of land are owned by one person. It's not like a whole pile of little pieces owned by loads of people. So where you have those kind of areas, and there's loads of them in this city, you can actually kind of get a dialogue going. Everyone's very cagey. Nobody really wants to kind of sit around a table together. But if you visit people individually and you talk to them about the integrity of your aspiration and what you're really hoping to achieve, and I suppose the fact that we were involved in a social enterprise helped to kind of underpin our good intentions. That there was no, while we were looking for work in an honest way, there was no hidden agenda. And the outcome of it was that everybody opened up a little. And when they started talking to each other, opportunities began to emerge. And some of them were obvious opportunities, like a healthcare project, primary care. There was a call out for that since 2008. And four sites were vying over it, and the health authority were kind of trying to pick between them. And we got them to agree that one of them should be it, and the other sites then came up for a rethink, and one of them will be a brewery, and one of them will be this distillery, and another one will be a student accommodation project supporting 300 student beds. And I mean, those are the kind of things that people with big money can agree on. But meanwhile, the ripple effect starts at ground level. It's little people, one by one, taking up the mantle of kind of trying to get whatever many thousand a month they have to get out of bed and actually eat, and getting those kind of just little wheels in motion, and little wheels bring an awful lot behind them. It's like the tugboat effect, you're trying to turn something really big around. It takes an awful lot of little things to kind of help them find their way, and that's how we did it. And it's how we're doing it again, I suppose, in Waterford and in Balbriggan, where those are the two black spots in Ireland where unemployment is really at its highest. Now, it's a struggle because the franchise model is difficult. You can't be everywhere at once, and a lot of it does depend on the the vision of the entrepreneur, you know. So I have lots of people in the Dublin office who think very much like I do now, but that confidence wanes very quickly with a remote community. So we work very hard in the social media space to try to make sure that everybody's together, thinking the same way and having that sort of confidence. And brass neck, you know, I mean, it takes a lot of courage to go out and knock on the door of the Viking Triangle Trust and say, you know, you have an empty building here, there's a tourist office that's really kind of not in the right place. Surely you guys should talk and I can do, you know, an interior fit out for you. You know, I mean, that's entrepreneurial thinking, and architects wait for the jobs to come to them, and that's the big problem. You know, you just go out and you find, you see it all the time. This is wrong. That shouldn't be there. You just actually join those things together, and people will listen if you have the right attitude, I think.
Do you think the success of the Fumbally Exchange is a sort of strength and depth thing? I mean, we're kind of sometimes taught in competition, but it seems the thing you really have going is you have lots of different types of professionals who are brave enough to say, I don't know everything, I can learn.
Yeah.
People around them kind of share these skills with each other. Do you
Yeah.
think that's what is kind of helping come through?
Absolutely, yeah, it's a really good point, because when we started out, there was a couple of us from the original Murray O'Leary organisation, and they were looking to kind of limit it to architects, and you could imagine the carnage, my God. So we kind of said we would open it to, you know, a shoe-in for creative professionals and an interview for innovation kind of people who were doing something different in their field. And we're really glad we added that on, because even though the creative energy is the thing that's really driving it, some of the people who are coming in with a high potential startup in marketing or in finance or in law, you know, they're doing something really, really exciting, and they're having to really work hard to be seen in their field, and that energy is coming into the room all the time. But I mean, like working with the guys who rebranded, say, the Gillan Macmillan, the biggest publishing house in Ireland, came to us and they wanted a logo, but the guy who was designing the logo said, you need a whole new think about your business, because they weren't really in I suppose fully equipped for the e-commerce kind of revolution. And they sat with us every Friday for 6 months, and we came up with a handbook and a new way of doing business, and they won loads of book awards, and they had their best year in 12 years, and you know, all of those kind of things are really great. But I mean, the point is, like you made, the graphic designer made me really rethink how I present myself, how I visually assemble material, how coherently I tell a narrative, how I know when to quit. There's at least 20 other slides. And just the bar is constantly being pushed higher. It's like healthy competition, I suppose, not the unhealthy kind when you're all submitting free work to a contracting authority.
Can I ask just I done my part one practice in Dublin from November 2011 until just August past.
Yeah.
And I kind of, when I went through, I kind of had to, you could sort of tell that the recession was happening, you know. It was sort of, it was very apparent there, you know.
Yeah.
We're in Northern Ireland, it wasn't really like that, I guess, because it's kind of protected in the sort of, by the public kind of works that usually happen there.
Yeah.
In that sort of way. But how do you think I guess before the recession, it was very much a financially driven country and city.
Yeah.
There's that sort of thing going on. But how do you think the recession has changed, I guess, the mindset of people within Dublin or people within Ireland, and kind of the approach to economics, or the approach to work? Has it radically sort of shifted how people think about that?
It has, and I mean, it has in two ways. One is a really great way, and the other is a really awful way. The really great way is that Dublin has found its edge again, and Dublin has always been the dirty old town, the place with a sense of humour, the place where lots of people think about great ideas. And during the recession, or during the tiger, everybody was kind of different, you know. Everybody got
well, I kind of
soft.
Growing up, and people from the south would seem different.
Yeah.
You know? It's just weird, you know. Was this kind of like almost like arsiness, but not
Yeah.
really, they didn't mean.
Did you say arty or arcy?
Arsiness,
Yeah.
like, you know,
Yeah.
not in a bad way, but you
Yeah.
can sort of tell. through some talent.
Yeah. I mean, like I went looking for a job in the 90s, and I mean, like it was pretty deep kind of economic depression then too, and everyone in my class had gone away. The world was in a better place, but Ireland was in a really bad place still. And I sent 70 CVs around. I had to hand deliver them because I couldn't afford the stamp, And then when I was hiring in the kind of 2000 to 2007 period, I would have students come in and go, well, why should I work for you? I've got 6 offers. That's not enough money for me. And it was a completely different mindset. And I think everybody was feeling that way, They were worth it. It was the L'Oreal kind of thinking. And we've gone back. Even L'Oreal aren't using that tagline anymore, interestingly. But I think the thing we really welcome is that change back to being kind of grounded, not having those notions about ourselves, and being able to kind of really create paths. Because our Irish people are really fantastic. They're really resilient. They're really good at just taking circumstances and going, well, I'll make the most of this, and then actually making the most of it. But there has been a really terrible burden of financial pressure also. And I mean, that's why I suppose I'm being so transparent about the circumstances of my own kind of financial mess, because that kind of thing is incredibly debilitating, and there's been such reliefs granted to people who have much bigger messes, like the classic case of the developer's wife from Nama getting €9,000 a week, and some of our guys are doing €9,000 a year tax return, and they're going, well, now I know where that's going, and it's incredibly difficult to kind of navigate that inequity. And one of the things that people say about Fumbally Exchange is that it's all about hope, It's a really sunny place to be, and everybody just rides those waves. And funnily enough, because we're all very mutually compatible in terms of the skills we have, if somebody's doing well and somebody's not, you can actually share the work out, and it means that the person who's doing well isn't held back because they can't resource the project, and the person who has no work can get a little traction by plugging in behind someone. So it's like, they kind of cancel each other out, those waves, and they make for a much more level, secure place. So I think the taxi driver was asking the same question. He said he went to Dublin 8 years ago, and he just hated it, and he couldn't find a cup of coffee that was less than €4. And now, like he said, he just went back there recently, and he just couldn't believe the amount of street art and just general joy in the streets, So I mean, like, it's very palpable, this energy, but it's also, on the other foot, there's been an awful lot of damage, and I don't think we'll know the measure of that, maybe until the next census.
Sorry. I think we're going to wrap up the questions there. Thanks very much. I'd like to just bring Ian Scott up for just a quick summary on the this idea of architecture and entrepreneurship. And we're talking about how maybe these principles of the Fumbally Exchange could be applied here in Glasgow, and how if people just had any thoughts on that. We'll keep it pretty brief, and then we'll head for a drink at the Mass Bar. All right?
Bring Lawler up as well, he's partly to blame.
Okay.
Shift your butt. You started it. I met this guy when I was on the government town centre, the town centre review, and see everything George has said about entrepreneurship. It is entrepreneurship, it's not business. And what was interesting in taking part in this review is I was there looking at it not from a business perspective but from an entrepreneurial perspective. And an entrepreneur sees the world the way they want it to be, and they fashion all the resources round about it, and they do 3 things. They learn how to negotiate their resources, they develop a can-do attitude by learning how to negotiate the resources, and they learn by doing, which is going out and just doing that didn't work and that didn't work. So it's a very pulling things together with virtually nothing, which is really what came out and was quite exciting. And
once you actually got it there, then other people, economic development people and other people go, what we need is a Fumbally Exchange in Govan. Now what we would like to do is take the model, which is the building, and they then look at it way up in that level and they try and transfer it. So what I was really going to say was, what has been fascinating is that there was me looking at enterprise with a real interest in music, culture, arts and all of these things, but mostly people. And around the rest of the table was a whole range of other people, some of whom shared those ideas, but some of them planners, architects, other people in economic development, particularly economists who are in appalling days, would be looking at it in terms of value created. And their question would be about something like Fumbally Exchange was, what would be the GVA that would create? What would be the gross value added to the economy? What would this be? How many jobs would be created? And you go, and they ask all these questions, and you're going, you've never done anything in your fucking life before, because all you sit and do is ask questions. So what was really interesting about the Town Centre Reviews, we actually got a whole host of people sharing ideas. And some wouldn't budge, but actually a whole lot of people began to understand. And that for me was the first time that I started thinking about entrepreneurship in terms of place and people. And the key thing out of all of this is that we think of entrepreneurs as individuals. They're not. They're rooted in their place. If you go into city refrigerations, big, and that's what Dermot was really interesting. I was describing this building, it's kind of like that in Govan, you know, in a wasteland, where Willie Hawkey, who built it, and from, you know, a multi-million-pound business. But this guy, when you go in, the first thing you see is this mural. It's not fantastic, but what it does is 19 so-and-so, and there's Willie Hawkey's house, where he started the business, not that far away, and then he moved to somewhere else, and then he moved to somewhere else, and now they've got this huge building because they are a huge business, and he is a highly successful entrepreneur. But the whole point of this is, he's rooted in where he came from, and that's what he's actually about. And most entrepreneurs are rooted in where they come from. Some of them want to get away from it and deny the past that you can't, but a lot of them actually celebrate it. So it became really interesting starting to look at the buildings and the people and the place. And I think the exciting thing that's coming out here is this idea of not for architects only, but the only way you can do things is actually to meet other people and do something. And there's two things that kind of came out. One was the number of clients that really don't know what they want from a project, which is absolutely incredible, and hand it over. And I particularly loved the project, what was it, the GAA project, which was so typical. This is what we want. Oh no, that's not going to work because it's going to have to be financially self-sustaining. Hello folks, did you not think of that at the beginning? No, they didn't, and they don't. So what you end up with is buildings that actually pull the business down and the organisation and the community group going. So I think there's a huge and exciting opportunity for you guys here, which is to actually start thinking like entrepreneurs yourself. Remember last time, Hanneke from Stone Opera was saying, be a developer, do something. You can learn so much about what you're doing as you go along. But actually what's really exciting is this whole thing is sitting down with people and saying, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? Is that what you want to do? How are you going to get there? And challenging every aspect of what the client is actually saying, but meeting other people. And then the next bit is the building is likely to be crowd-funded in the sense of, I've got a bunch of stone bricks here that you can use all of these things. And I don't know, but for me, from speaking from an entrepreneurial perspective, the real thrill is making something out of a bunch of nothing. Mm-hmm. And that must be the same for you. Is that, I don't know what an alchemist actually does, but you can maybe sort of chip in a couple of comments. I'm sure you will.
It's very hard to kind of explain it. I think what's really interesting around both observations is around the nature of practice. And it was interesting in Murray O'Leary was an outstanding, there was a massive idea as well as a practice. You know, you heard Murray O'Leary, and I got a job When I went to college first in Dublin, I went into a room which was absolutely not like this at all. It was a sick building off O'Connell Street. And I walked in the first day, and the lecturer said, "Thanks a million now. Everybody worked very hard, that's great. Sit down, take a seat. You're going to work real hard for 3 years. I know by looking at you, you do all your exams and whatnot. And at the end of those 3 years, lads, none of you will get a job." And that was in the first 10 minutes of my first university experience, which is a bit of a leveler, to put it mildly. And the big ideas around the time were when Murray O'Leary had gone into Moscow, and we're working with Airdrieontown, and we started to internationalise and move across boundaries and start to kind of work with people from different cultures, and you could see it shaping the nature of architecture, the discipline and the idea. But when you take those massive practices away from a country or away from the way that we think and come back in, then start to look at the nature of practice and the nature of conversations and the nature of form and the nature of negotiation, it actually becomes a very rich, challenging environment, but a very rich environment then to kind of push different forms of practice, not just the old stuff recycled, but genuine new practice. I think that the second part around it is that a risk of these type of discussions, for George, for you, and for Ian, is people who don't give a damn about you or what you do will look at that story and say, "That's great, let's do tons of that. Let's have loads of these things all over the place," without understanding the basic issue, which is the conditions. So the conditions of a good building, the brief, the site, the folk, they're really important. You can't just take a Fumbally Exchange and say, "Here, have 10 of them in the new mixed-use quarter," or "Here, have 100 square foot of it in the next place." You've got to get with the specificity of it.
Yeah.
So the practice part's important because it changes, but the specificity is the same issue that architecture has had to grapple with forever and a day, specificity. So I think in that, be very aware of people who say, "That's great, go off and be an entrepreneur," or "Start an idea and go off and do loads of it." Listen deeply to some of those things around the specifics, but listen more to that challenge and rise to it and shape the product.
So, look at places under the radar. I mean, I saw what's happening behind the Odeon cinema in the town, and the thing that's gone up, which is clearly a developer-led project. It's going to be vast, and it's going to be horrible in its ugly, it's going to destroy that part and sense of Glasgow. But if you go down and go round about, I keep walking past Central Station entrance on Argyle Street, where the kind of, as you're moving down towards the Tron Gate, there's the Heinz Head building, which is now empty. Go and have a look at it, because it is the most beautiful, I think it must be one of these iron buildings with the fabulous windows. It's lying empty, and the first time I recognised it was because the bottom was empty as well. And I keep thinking, what could you do with that building? But look at it from a sense of the place. Who comes out there every day, all the time? It's disgorging thousands of commuters coming out of Central Station. You've got St Enoch's there, you've got massive footfall, and you've got a huge opportunity with this building, and I don't know what it's going to be. So what I'm going to now leave you with, if that's okay, is we've got to go ahead for this innovation challenge, exploiting the opportunity, the entrepreneurial opportunities of Scotland's towns. It will be launched in March, and part of that will be a challenge to say, what will the enterprising town of the future look like? But in order to understand that, you have to understand how people are going to behave. We know that 40% of people are going to be working from home or working in a micro business. And one thing that happens on that side of things is you want to get out of the house and go and meet people. So that means new life for old buildings and new buildings in old areas, in different places. The next thing is, what does an entrepreneur love above anything else? Low overheads. The cheaper the better. That's why Fumbally began to take off. It was cheap. The third thing is, you're adding value, to use the commercial jargon to a place, and that's the bit that you missed out on. You used to have had the handcuffs on to the developer and the landlord going, we're going to make this an awful lot more wealthy for you, but you've learned that. This is all part of the thing. Look at Richard Florida and the stuff he's written about the rise of the creative class. That adds money to an area, and it becomes trendy, and everybody with creative moves out. So there's a challenge on its way. Have a wee think about it, and start thinking in a different way. We can maybe do something in entrepreneurship and what it actually means. But that's my tuppence worth. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much, guys. Thank you. We're just going to head over to the mass bar if anyone fancies a drink. Thanks very much, guys.